She found the photograph at 8 months pregnant, her husband's phone, a woman's hand on white sheets, and on that hand, a ring worth $400,000, a ring that was supposed to be locked in her mother-in-law's safe. But here's the thing. When she checked that safe the next morning, the ring was still there, sitting in its velvet box, gleaming under the light, except it was fake. The real sapphire was on another woman's finger, and her mother-in-law knew. Her husband knew. Everyone knew except her. They had a plan. Wait until she delivered the baby, claim she was mentally unstable, take her daughter, and replace her with the mistress who was already wearing the family ring. But they made one mistake. They underestimated a pregnant woman with nothing left to lose. 6 days later, at her mother-in-law's anniversary dinner, the mistress couldn't resist showing off that sapphire ring in front of 40 guests. She thought she had won. She had no idea what was coming. What happened next silenced an entire room and destroyed a family's lives in under 5 minutes. This is the story of how one woman turned her darkest moment into her greatest victory. Value statement. This story carries a powerful message for anyone who has ever felt trapped, betrayed, or underestimated. Sometimes the people closest to us become our greatest deceivers, and sometimes the only person who can save you is yourself. The meaning of this story is simple but profound. Your worth is not defined by those who failed to see it. Your strength is not measured by how much you can endure, but by your courage to walk away from what no longer serves you. If you have ever been told you are not enough, this story is for you. If you have ever wondered whether starting over was possible, this story is your answer. The sapphire caught the light in the photograph. Carrie's hand froze on her husband's phone. She knew that ring. She knew it the way she knew her own heartbeat. The shower was still running. Steam crept under the bathroom door. Mitch was humming something, a song she didn't recognize, maybe something new, maybe something he'd learned from someone else. She hadn't meant to look. She was searching for the restaurant reservation confirmation, the one for their anniversary dinner. 8 years of marriage, 8 months of pregnancy, one simple dinner to celebrate both. But the phone had buzzed in her hand, a text notification, a name she didn't recognize. Bradley. She told herself not to look. Her thumb disagreed. The text thread opened. Not words, just a photograph. A woman's hand against white sheets, slender fingers, red nail polish, and on the ring finger, catching every bit of light in the frame, the Ashford sapphire. Carrie's throat closed, her vision tunneled. The baby kicked against her ribs, once, twice. Like a warning she'd received too late. She scrolled up, then down, then up again. Locked the phone, unlocked it, locked it. Her thumb knew what her brain refused to accept. The sapphire was supposed to be in Eleanor's safe. Her mother-in-law had shown it to her on their wedding day. A family heirloom. 4 generations of Ashford brides. Burmese. Unheeded. Worth more than most people's houses. Eleanor had promised it to Carrie. After she gave the family an heir, the shower stopped. The humming continued. Carrie set the phone down exactly where she'd found it. Face down on the nightstand. Her hands weren't shaking. She noticed that, found it strange. The bathroom door opened. Steam rolled out like fog. Mitch emerged with a towel around his waist. His chest still wet, his smile still easy. "Hey, beautiful," he said. "You ready for dinner?" She watched herself smile, heard herself say the right words. "The reservation's at 7. I should start getting dressed." He crossed to the closet, pulled out a shirt she'd bought him for Christmas, blue, to match his eyes. She'd spent an hour choosing it. "You okay?" he asked. "You look pale." His hand found her belly. Warm, familiar, the hand that had held hers at their wedding, the hand that had touched her face when they found out about the baby, the hand that belonged to a stranger now. Just tired, she said. The baby's been active today. He kissed her forehead, the same kiss he'd given her every morning for 8 years. It felt like a lie now. Maybe it always had been. Rest for a bit, he said. I'll call when it's time to leave. She nodded, watched him dress, the man she'd married, the man she'd built her life around, the man whose phone held a photograph that changed everything. The baby kicked again, harder this time. I'm watching my life end, she thought, and he's asking about dinner. 3 hours later, Carrie sat across from her mother-in-law at the restaurant. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, the kind of place where secrets were kept behind pleasant smiles and expensive wine. Eleanor Ashford commanded the table the way she commanded every room. Silver hair, perfectly styled, pearls at her throat, the matriarch of a family that traced its money back 5 generations. Mitch sat beside his mother, attentive, charming, the golden sun. Carrie's eyes kept drifting to Eleanor's hands. Her ring finger was bare tonight, just a simple gold band, no sapphire. You seem distracted, dear, Eleanor said. Her voice was warm. It always was, warm like a fire that could burn you if you got too close. Just pregnancy brain, Carrie replied. The doctor says it's normal in the 3rd trimester. Of course. Eleanor's smile didn't reach her eyes. It never did. Speaking of which, we should discuss the christening. I was thinking the cathedral, naturally. The Ashfords have baptized there for generations. Mitch nodded. Whatever you think is best, Mother. Carrie watched them. Mother and son, a unit she'd never quite penetrated. 8 years of trying, 8 years of almost belonging. Eleanor, she heard herself say, I was thinking about the sapphire. Something flickered across her mother-in-law's face. Gone so fast Carrie might have imagined it. The sapphire, dear? The family ring. You mentioned giving it to me after the baby comes. Eleanor's laugh was light, musical, practiced. Still in the safe, of course. I'm saving it for the christening gift. A surprise for the new mother. She reached across the table, patted Carrie's hand. Her bare ring finger caught the candlelight. You'll have it soon enough, Eleanor said. I promise. Carrie smiled, nodded, said the right things, but she'd seen the photograph, the sapphire on another woman's hand. Either Eleanor was lying or someone had stolen from the Ashford safe. Either way, Carrie needed to know the truth. The next morning, she made an excuse to visit Eleanor's house. Baby shower planning, fabric samples for the nursery curtains, any reason that would get her through the door. Eleanor's housekeeper let her in with a smile. Mrs. Eleanor is at her garden club. She won't be back until this afternoon. Perfect. Carrie climbed the stairs to the study. Her heart pounded against her ribs. The baby turned inside her, restless, sensing something. The safe was behind a portrait of Warren's grandfather. Old money loved its traditions. Old money also loved predictable hiding places. Carrie knew the combination. Eleanor had shared it after the wedding, a gesture of trust, of family. Her fingers trembled as she turned the dial. Left, right, left again. The lock clicked. The door swung open. Inside, she found the velvet box immediately. Navy blue, embossed with the Ashford crest. The same box Eleanor had opened on Carrie's wedding day. She lifted the lid. The sapphire gleamed back at her, deep blue, brilliant. Her breath rushed out. Relief flooded her chest. She'd been wrong, paranoid. The ring was here. Everything was fine. Then she held it up to the light, and her stomach dropped. The stone was wrong. Too bright. Too perfect. No inclusion, no silk, no natural fingerprint of the earth. She'd studied gemology in design school. She knew what she was looking at. This was lab-created, beautiful, flawless, and completely, utterly worthless. The real Ashford sapphire was on another woman's hand. Carrie closed the box, replaced it exactly as she'd found it, shut the safe, straightened the portrait. Then she walked to her car, sat in the driver's seat, and couldn't move. The parking lot was quiet. Birds sang in the oak trees. A gardener pushed a wheelbarrow across the lawn. Normal sounds, normal life, happening all around her while her world collapsed. She tried to think. When did Mitch have access to the safe? When could he have made the switch? The family Christmas party, 3 months ago. Eleanor had shown the ring to guests. Carrie remembered now. The way Mitch had lingered near his mother's study. The way he'd dismissed it when she asked. Just looking for more wine, he'd said. 3 months. He'd been planning this for at least 3 months. While she was 5 months pregnant, while she was decorating the nursery, while she was believing every lie he told her, the baby kicked. Hard. Angry. I know, Carrie whispered. I know. She pulled out her phone, scrolled to Josie's number, her best friend since college, her maid of honor, the divorce attorney who'd told her once, over too much wine, that she could spot a cheating husband from across a courtroom. The phone rang twice. Carrie, what's wrong? She didn't ask how Josie knew. Josie always knew. I need you to run a name for me, Carrie said. Her voice sounded strange, flat, like it belonged to someone else. Who is she? Carrie closed her eyes, took a breath, said the words out loud for the first time. Bryn Holloway. She works at Mitch's firm. Started 8 months ago. Silence. Then Josie's sharp intake of breath, the same sound Carrie's mother had made when they got the call about Dad. The sound of someone watching you fall. 8 months, Josie said. Carrie, you're 8 months pregnant. I know. Are you sure? Maybe there's an explanation. Maybe, there's a ring, Carrie said. The Ashford sapphire. It's supposed to be in Eleanor's safe. But I just checked. The one in the safe is fake. And I have a photograph of the real one on another woman's hand. More silence. Then Josie's voice. Harder now. Professional. Where are you? Eleanor's driveway. Go home. Lock the door. Don't talk to Mitch. I'm coming over. The line went dead. Carrie sat there for another minute, then another, watching the gardener work, watching the birds hop across the lawn, watching her old life fade like morning fog. Finally, she started the car, put it in drive, headed home to wait. She didn't cry, not yet. The tears would come later. Right now, there was only the cold, clear knowledge of betrayal, the certainty that nothing would ever be the same. And somewhere, underneath the shock and the hurt, the first faint ember of something else, anger. Josie arrived within the hour. She came alone. No rustle. No questions that could wait. Carrie watched her from the window. Her best friend walked up the driveway with the focused stride of a woman going to war. Navy blazer, sensible heels, the same outfit she wore to court. The doorbell rang. Carrie opened it. Josie took one look at her face and pulled her into a hug. Tight, fierce. The kind of hug that said everything words couldn't. Kitchen? Josie said. Tea? Then you tell me everything. They sat at the breakfast table. The same table where Carrie and Mitch had shared 1,000 mornings. Coffee and newspapers, and plans for the future. All of it poison now. Carrie told her everything. The phone, the photograph, the fake ring in the safe, the timeline that matched her pregnancy exactly. Josie listened without interrupting. When Carrie finished, she pulled out her laptop. Bryn Holloway, she said. Let's see who we're dealing with. The search took less than 5 minutes. social media, LinkedIn, public records, the digital footprint of a woman who wanted to be seen. Bryn Holloway. 28 years old, marketing consultant at Ashford Development. Before that, bottle service at a downtown club. Before that, community college dropout. Before that, nothing. She came from nowhere, Josie said. No connections, no experience, and somehow she landed a $40,000 a year job at your husband's firm. He created the position for her, Carrie said. She knew it without proof. The way you know things about the person you've shared a bed with for 8 years. Probably. Josie scrolled through more photos. She's careful online. No pictures with him. No obvious connection. But look at this. She turned the laptop around. A photograph from 3 months ago. Some charity event Carrie didn't recognize. In the background, slightly out of focus, 2 figures standing close together. Mitch's hand on a woman's lower back, the woman's red hair catching the light. Bryn. The affair started before she was hired, Carrie said. He didn't meet her at work. He got her the job. That's my read, too. Josie closed the laptop. The question is, what do you want to do about it? Carrie touched her belly. The baby had gone still. Sleeping, maybe, or just listening. I want to know everything, she said. How long? How much? Who else knew? That's going to hurt. I know. Josie nodded. She'd heard those words before. From clients who thought they were ready. Most of them weren't. But Josie had known Carrie for 15 years. She knew what that quiet voice meant. Russell can help, she said. Off the record. He's been doing forensic accounting for divorce cases for a decade. If Mitch is hiding money, Russell will find it. Do it. Josie made the call, then another, then a third. Carrie listened to her friend work, watched her transform from Josie into Mrs. Keller Esquire, a woman who destroyed cheating husbands for a living. When she finished, Josie put down the phone. There's something else, she said. Her voice had changed. Careful now, the way doctors sound before bad news. Tell me. Bryn Holloway RSVP'd yes to your mother-in-law's dinner party, the one next Saturday. Carrie's chest tightened. Eleanor's anniversary party? The one I'm supposed to co-host? Yes, and it gets worse. Josie pulled up her email, scrolled to a forwarded message. I have a contact who handles event planning for the Ashford Foundation. She sent me the guest list an hour ago. She turned the phone toward Carrie. The screen showed a spreadsheet. Names and +1s and relationship categories. Bryn Holloway, +1. Grace Holloway, mother. Relationship to family, future daughter-in-law. The words blurred. Carrie read them again, then again. Future daughter-in-law, she said. Her voice sounded far away, like it was coming from somewhere else. Eleanor knows, Josie said. She's not just tolerating this affair, she's planning for it. She's introducing Bryn to society as the next Mrs. Ashford. Carrie stood up. Her legs felt strange, wobbly. She walked to the window, looked out at the backyard where she'd imagined her daughter playing. First steps on that grass, birthday parties under those trees. They're replacing me, she said. I haven't even delivered the baby yet, and they're already replacing me. Carrie? How long, Josie? She turned around. How long has Eleanor been planning this? I don't know yet, but we're going to find out. The next 48 hours were the longest of Carrie's life. Russell dove into Mitch's finances. What he found made Carrie sick. A second bank account, opened 18 months ago, regular deposits that matched bonuses. Mitch had told her were smaller than they actually were. A condo in the city, lease signed 14 months ago, furniture receipts, restaurant charges, a whole second life built on stolen money. He's been siphoning from your joint accounts, Russell said. His voice was calm, professional, but his eyes were angry. Not huge amounts at first, 1,000 here, 2,000 there, but it adds up. Over the past year, he's moved almost $60,000 into accounts you didn't know existed. My design firm money, Carrie said. I put everything into our joint account. I trusted him to manage our investments. There's more. Russell hesitated, looked at Josie, looked back at Carrie. Tell me. Your grandmother's trust, the one that was supposed to transfer to your children. Mitch has been drawing against it. Using your power of attorney from when you were on bed rest last year. The room tilted. Carrie grabbed the counter for support. That was my daughter's college fund, she whispered. That was the only thing I had left from my grandmother. He spent most of it, renovations on the condo, a car for Bryn, and... Russell paused. A down payment on a house. In Bryn's name, the house you two were supposed to move into after the baby came. Carrie didn't cry. She was past crying now. Something cold had settled in her chest. Something hard and clear and final. They were going to take everything, she said. My money, my home, my daughter, everything. Not if we stop them, Josie said. Not if we fight back. How? The dinner party. Saturday. That's when they're planning to announce the engagement. Before you have even recovered from childbirth. They're counting on you being too weak, too emotional, too postpartum to fight. So we beat them to it? Josie smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile she wore when she was about to destroy someone in court. Exactly. That night, Carrie sat alone in the nursery. The room she'd painted herself, sage green walls because Mitch's mother had wanted blue, and Carrie had quietly insisted on something different. It might be a girl, she'd said then. Eleanor's face had flickered with disappointment. Carrie understood now. Eleanor had known about Bryn even then, had been hoping for a grandson, an heir that would make the replacement easier. The mobile turned slowly above the crib. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, the same song Carrie's mother had sung to her, the same song she'd planned to sing to her daughter. She opened the closet. Tiny dresses hung in a row. Size newborn, size 3 months, size 6 months. She'd been so sure, so stupidly, painfully sure. The baby moved inside her, a slow roll from one side to the other, getting ready, running out of room. I'm sorry, Carrie whispered. I'm so sorry. I didn't see it sooner. She closed her eyes. Let the tears come finally. Hot and silent and endless. But underneath the grief, something else was growing. The cold thing in her chest. The hard thing. The thing that would get her through the days ahead. She wasn't just sad anymore. She was furious, and she was going to make them pay. The phone buzzed at midnight. A text from a number Carrie didn't recognize. She was still awake. Sleep had become a stranger these past few days. She opened the message. A photograph filled the screen. The sapphire ring on Bryn's hand. Manicured nails, fresh polish. The ring catching light like it was showing off. The caption read, "Can't wait for Saturday, finally making it official." The sender was listed in contacts Carrie had never seen before. A contact labeled Future DIL. She checked the phone number against Eleanor's private line. They matched. Her mother-in-law had texted the photograph to Bryn. Eleanor was coordinating with her son's mistress, planning, celebrating, counting down the days until Carrie could be discarded. Something broke inside her then. Not her heart, that had already shattered. Something else, the part of her that still hoped, the part that wanted to believe there was some explanation, some misunderstanding. There was no misunderstanding. There was only betrayal. deep and deliberate and planned. I'm not crazy, she thought. The ring is fake. The safe is a lie. My marriage is a crime scene. She didn't sleep that night. She sat in the dark kitchen and made lists. What she knew, what she suspected, what she needed to prove. By morning, she had a plan. Josie came over at 9. Russell arrived at 10 with his laptop and 3 cups of coffee. By noon, the picture had become terrifyingly clear. The affair started before Bryn was hired, Russell confirmed. I found charges at the club where she worked, bottle service, private rooms. Going back almost 2 years. 2 years? Carrie repeated. We were trying to get pregnant 2 years ago. I'm sorry. Don't be. Just keep going. Russell pulled up more documents, bank statements, credit card receipts, the paper trail of a double life. He created her position at the firm 6 days after you announced your pregnancy. The job description didn't exist before that. He literally invented a role to give his mistress a salary. Josie leaned forward. What about the house? The one in Bryn's name? Closed escrow, 3 months ago, 4 bedrooms, 3 baths, pool, guest house. Russell paused. It's 2 blocks from the elementary school you and Carrie toured last spring, the elementary school. Carrie remembered that day, walking through the bright hallways, imagining their daughter learning to read. Mitch had been so attentive, so excited, so completely, utterly fake. He was planning our daughter's future, she said. Just not with me in it. The room went quiet. Outside, a bird sang in the maple tree. A car drove past. Normal sounds from a normal world that had nothing to do with the nightmare unfolding inside. There's something else, Russell said. He looked at Josie. Some silent communication passed between them. Tell me, Carrie said. Whatever it is, I need to know. The plan. I found emails between Mitch and a divorce attorney. Not someone local, someone in the city, someone who specializes in humpy asset custody cases. He turned his laptop around. The email chain filled the screen. The strategy was clinical. Wait until 6 weeks postpartum. Document any signs of instability. File for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. Push for primary custody based on the mother's mental state. Postpartum depression. That was their angle. They were going to use her own hormones against her, claim she was unstable, take her daughter. Eleanor's handwriting is all over this, Josie said. The language, the strategy. She's done this before. Done what? Warren's sister, 30 years ago. She married someone Eleanor didn't approve of. 3 years later, she lost everything in a divorce. Custody, assets, her reputation. The family closed ranks and destroyed her. Carrie thought of Aunt Patricia. The family ghost. The name no one mentioned at holidays. She'd assumed it was some ancient scandal, not a blueprint. So that's the plan, she said. Wait until I'm weak. Take my daughter, replace me with Bryn, and make it look like my fault. That's the plan, Josie confirmed. But they don't know we know, and that's our advantage. The doorbell rang. All 3 of them froze. Carrie checked her phone. No messages, no warning. She walked to the door and looked through the peephole. Margot Ashford Blake stood on the porch. Mitch's older sister. Rain dripped from her umbrella. Her face was pale. Carrie opened the door. I know, Margot said. Just that. 2 words. Standing in the rain like a confession. You should come inside. They sat in the living room. Margot on one end of the couch, Carrie on the other, Josie and Russell in the chairs across from them. A strange tribunal for a strange day. How long? Carrie asked. 6 months, maybe longer. Margot twisted her wedding ring, a nervous habit Carrie had never noticed before. I saw them together at a restaurant, not here, in the city. I was there for a conference. They didn't see me. Why didn't you tell me? Margot's eyes filled with tears. I didn't know how. You were pregnant. You were so happy. And I thought maybe I was wrong. Maybe there was an explanation. There's no explanation. I know that now. Margot wiped her eyes, straightened her spine. Mother picked her. Bryn. She's from one of Mother's charity projects. A girl from nothing who wanted everything. Mother saw potential. The word hung in the air. Potential. Like Bryn was an investment. A stock to be cultivated. She's been grooming her, Margot continued, teaching her to dress, to speak, to perform wealth. I've seen them together at the club, Mother introducing her to people, calling her a family friend. A family friend, Carrie repeated. That's what she calls the woman sleeping with her son. Mother doesn't see it that way. She sees an upgrade. Margot winced at her own words. I'm sorry. That's horrible. But that's how she thinks. She's always thought you were too independent, too ambitious, too much your own person. I was never the wife, Carrie thought. I was the incubator. 8 years of marriage, and I was just the surrogate for the Ashford heir. What about Warren? Josie asked. Does he know? Margot hesitated. Father suspects. He's not stupid. But he and Mother have an arrangement. She runs the family. He stays out of it. That's how it's been for 40 years. And your brother? Does he love her? Bryn? Margot laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. Mitch doesn't love anyone except Mitch. Bryn is convenient. She's young. She's grateful. She doesn't challenge him the way Carrie does. She looked at Carrie. He was always intimidated by you. Your career, your talent, your independence. Bryn makes him feel important. That's all he's ever wanted. They sat with that for a moment. The portrait of a man Carrie had thought she knew, a stranger wearing her husband's face. So what do we do? Margot asked. How do we stop them? Josie and Russell exchanged glances. Then Josie leaned forward. The dinner party, Saturday. That's when they're planning to announce Bryn as the new daughter-in-law. Before Carrie has even delivered. Before she's had a chance to recover or fight. That's insane, Margot said. The guests will be scandalized. Will they? Or will they fall in line the way everyone always does when Eleanor Ashford makes a decision? Margot didn't answer. They both knew the truth. Eleanor's world bowed to Eleanor's will. It always had. We need to beat them to it, Carrie said. We need to expose everything before they can control the narrative. How? Carrie touched her belly. Her daughter kicked up against her palm. Strong, fierce, already fighting. I have an idea, she said, but I'm going to need your help. All of you. The War Council convened around Carrie's kitchen table, Josie with her legal pad, Russell with his laptop, Margot with information only an insider could provide. And Carrie, 8 months pregnant, exhausted, heartbroken, and more determined than she'd ever been in her life. The dinner party is in 6 days, Josie said. Eleanor has invited 40 guests. Old money, society connections, people who matter in this city. People who gossip, Margot added. Everything that happens Saturday night will be all over town by Sunday brunch. Exactly. Josie flipped through her notes. That's why they chose this event. Maximum exposure. Maximum pressure. By the time Carrie recovers from childbirth, the story will already be written. Poor Mitch, trapped in a loveless marriage. Sweet Bryn, waiting patiently for her chance. Unstable Carrie, unable to cope with motherhood. That's disgusting, Russell said. That's strategy. Eleanor didn't build her empire by being nice. She built it by controlling information. We need to take that control away. Carrie had been quiet, thinking, planning. Now she spoke. The ring. Everyone turned to look at her. The sapphire. That's the key. Eleanor promised it to me publicly, at our wedding, in front of 100 witnesses. She said it would be mine when I gave the family an heir. But the ring in the safe is fake, Josie said. The real one is on Bryn's hand. Exactly. Eleanor either knows and is complicit, or someone stole from her safe without her knowledge. Either way, she's exposed. Margot's eyes widened. You want to confront her about the ring. At the dinner party, in front of everyone. Not confront, reveal. Carrie's voice was steady now. The cold thing in her chest had crystallized into something diamond hard. Bryn is going to show off that ring. She won't be able to resist. It's her trophy, her proof that she won. And when she does, I'll have the real one, and I'll let everyone see the truth. Silence fell over the table. Russell typed something into his laptop. Josie made notes. Margot stared at Carrie, like she was seeing her for the first time. How? Josie finally asked. The real sapphire is on Bryn's finger. You can't exactly ask her to hand it over. I don't need her ring. I need proof that hers is fake. And I need the original back. Warren, Margot said suddenly. Father, he has access to everything. If anyone can get the real ring, it's him. Would he help? Margot thought about it. Her father, the retired judge. The quiet man who'd spent 40 years letting his wife run the family while he retreated into his study. I don't know, she admitted, but I think he's been waiting for someone to ask. The next morning, Russell's phone rang at 7. He answered, listened. His face went pale. That was my contact at the courthouse, he said when he hung up. Warren Ashford just requested copies of Mitch's firm incorporation documents and the prenuptial agreement between him and Eleanor. Why would he want those? Carrie asked. Russell and Josie exchanged looks. Because he's building a case, Josie said slowly. The prenup, the firm documents. He's looking for leverage. Against Eleanor? Against all of them. That afternoon, Carrie's phone rang, a number she didn't recognize. She answered anyway. Caroline? Warren Ashford's voice was deeper than she remembered, older. I'd like to speak with you, privately, before Saturday. About what? About my family, and what they're planning to do to you. They met at a coffee shop across town, neutral territory. Warren was already there when Carrie arrived. He looked smaller somehow, diminished, like the weight of what he knew had compressed him. Thank you for coming, he said. Carrie sat across from him, waited. I know what my wife has done, Warren said. I know what my son has become. I've known for some time. Then why didn't you stop it? He was quiet for a long moment. His coffee sat untouched. Steam curled toward the ceiling. Because I didn't have proof. I had suspicions, observations, but nothing concrete, nothing I could use. He finally looked at her. His eyes were tired, sad. Your friend Russell sent me the financial documents yesterday. The money Mitch stole, the house in that woman's name, everything. So now you have proof. Now I have proof. Carrie leaned forward. What are you going to do with it? Warren reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a velvet box, navy blue, the Ashford crest embossed on the lid. He pushed it across the table. Open it. Carrie's hands trembled as she lifted the lid. Inside, catching the afternoon light, the Ashford sapphire gleamed, deep blue, ancient, real. How? She whispered. I had it appraised 3 weeks ago, after I saw my son's mistress wearing it at a charity event. The ring in Eleanor's safe is synthetic. I had this one made years ago as a backup. A precaution. He paused. I never trusted my wife's relationship with precious things. Carrie stared at the ring, the same ring she'd seen in the photograph, the same ring Eleanor had promised her, the same ring that had started everything. "It was always meant to be yours," Warren said. "I'm sorry it took me so long to give it to you." "Why now? Why help me now?" Warren's face hardened. Something flickered behind his eyes. Something that might have been shame. "Because my granddaughter deserves better than what my son has planned for her. Because my wife has gone too far this time. And because—" He stopped, started again. "Because 40 years ago, I watched Eleanor destroy my sister. I was too weak to stop it then. I won't make the same mistake twice." He stood, placed money on the table. For the coffee, neither of them had touched. "Saturday night," he said. "Whatever you're planning. I'll be there, and I'll do what needs to be done." Then he walked out into the afternoon sun, an old man, a broken man, but maybe, finally, a man ready to make things right. Carrie sat alone for another hour, the ring box heavy in her purse, the weight of it pressing against her hip, like a promise. She'd wanted answers. She'd gotten a weapon. Now she just needed to figure out how to use it. 4 days until the dinner party. Carrie had stopped sleeping, stopped eating, stopped doing anything except plan. Josie arrived every morning with documents. Russell sent updates every afternoon. Margot called every evening with intelligence from inside the family compound. And slowly, piece by piece, they built their case. "The forensics are complete," Russell said on Wednesday. He spread printouts across Carrie's dining table. "Mitch has moved a total of $237,000 into accounts you didn't know existed. $237,000. Carrie repeated the number. Felt nothing. She was past feeling now. "That includes your grandmother's trust, the joint savings, and skimmed bonuses going back 18 months. Russell tapped a highlighted line. "He also took out a loan against the house. Your house. $50,000, using forged documents." "Forged?" "He signed your name, copied your signature from your tax returns." Russell's jaw tightened. "That's felony fraud. Multiple counts." Josie made notes. "We can use that. Criminal charges as leverage if he tries to fight the divorce." "He won't fight," Carrie said. "Eleanor won't let him. She'll want this quiet, contained. She'll pressure him to settle quickly so the scandal doesn't spread. Then we make sure the scandal spreads first." That afternoon, Carrie visited a gemologist, not Eleanor's appraiser, someone independent, someone who owed favors to no one. Dorothy Pemberton had been evaluating precious stones for 40 years. Her office smelled like leather and old money, exactly the kind of old money the Ashfords respected. Carrie showed her the ring from Warren, then the photograph on her phone, the sapphire on Bryn's hand. "This ring," Mrs. Pemberton said, holding Warren's, "is genuine, Burmese sapphire, unheated, late Victorian setting, remarkable piece, worth approximately $400,000. She studied the photograph, enlarged it, squinted at the screen. "And this one? Synthetic. Well made. The color is slightly too uniform. No silk, no natural inclusions. Maybe $2,000. Maybe less." Carrie felt something loosen in her chest. Proof. Finally, proof. Would you be willing to testify to that? In front of witnesses? Mrs. Pemberton smiled. It was not a friendly smile. "I've been waiting years for someone to expose Eleanor Ashford. That woman has been passing off enhanced stones as natural for decades. It would be my pleasure." The plan came together. Mrs. Pemberton would attend the dinner party as Margot's guest. A gemologist friend. Nothing suspicious. When Bryn inevitably showed off her ring, Carrie would produce the real sapphire. Mrs. Pemberton would authenticate both, and Eleanor's carefully constructed lie would collapse in front of everyone who mattered. "What about after?" Josie asked. They'll fight back. Eleanor doesn't lose gracefully. I know. Carrie touched her belly. The baby had dropped lower now, running out of time. That's why we need Warren. If he testifies about the fraud, about the planned divorce strategy, Eleanor loses her moral authority. She can't spin a narrative when her own husband is contradicting her. And if Warren backs out, he won't. Carrie said it with more confidence than she felt. He wants absolution. 40 years of standing by while Eleanor destroyed people. This is his chance to make it right. Friday night, 24 hours until the dinner party. Carrie sat in the nursery. Moonlight streamed through the windows. The mobile turned slowly overhead. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. She couldn't sleep, couldn't stop her mind from racing. Tomorrow would change everything. Tomorrow would end one life and begin another. Josie had run through scenarios with her. Every possible variation. What if Eleanor denied everything? What if Mitch made a scene? What if Bryn attacked her physically? Stay calm, Josie had said. The power isn't in what you say, it's in making them say too much. Carrie practiced her breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the same technique from her birthing class. The same technique she'd need in a few weeks, or sooner. The baby moved, a slow stretch, a kick against her ribs. Almost time, Carrie whispered, for both of us. She closed her eyes, tried to remember what hope felt like, tried to imagine a future beyond Saturday night. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. She opened it, expecting another taunt from Eleanor. Another photograph of Bryn's ring. Another twist of the knife. Instead, just one line, I'll be there, whatever you need, Warren. Carrie set down the phone, looked around the nursery she'd built with her own hands, the walls she'd painted, the furniture she'd chosen, the dreams she'd decorated into every corner. They wanted to take this from her. Her home, her daughter, her life. They didn't know her at all. She placed her hand on her belly, felt her daughter kick, strong, determined, ready to fight. Tomorrow, she whispered. Tomorrow we take it all back. Saturday morning arrived with gray skies and the smell of rain. Carrie stood at her bedroom window, watching clouds gather over the city, an appropriate backdrop for what was coming. Margot arrived at 10 with garment bags and determination. We need to choose your dress, she said, something powerful, something that says you belong at that table more than anyone. They went through Carrie's closet, maternity clothes, sensible, comfortable, nothing that screamed, I'm about to expose your entire family in front of 40 witnesses. These won't do, Margot said. She unzipped the garment bag she'd brought. I had something made. Inside was a dress, navy silk, empire waist, simple and devastating, the kind of dress that whispered old money and screamed quiet power. Carrie touched the fabric. Soft, expensive, perfect. You look like you're going to war, Margot said when Carrie tried it on. I am. They spent the afternoon preparing. Hair, makeup, the pearl earrings that had belonged to Carrie's grandmother. Real pearls, real heritage, real worth. Josie came over at 4 with final documents, everything they might need, financial records, photographs. The timeline of betrayal. Remember, Josie said, don't volunteer information. Let them hang themselves. Bryn can't resist showing off. Eleanor can't resist controlling the narrative. Give them rope. They'll do the rest. And if it goes wrong, it won't. Josie squeezed her hand. You've got this. You've had this all along. At 6, Carrie stood alone in the nursery. 1 hour until she had to leave. 1 hour until everything changed. The room was quiet, peaceful, the mobile hung still. The stuffed elephant she'd bought before she knew, the closet full of tiny dresses she might never use. I wanted to give you everything, she whispered. A family, a father, a name that meant something. Tears came. The first tears she'd allowed herself in days. I'm sorry you won't have the life I planned, but I promise you'll have me. All of me. Whatever that's worth. The baby kicked, hard, like a response, like a reassurance. Carrie wiped her eyes, straightened her spine, looked at her reflection in the nursery mirror, swollen ankles, dark circles, stretched skin. 8 months of carrying a child her husband had already planned to take from her. She didn't look powerful. She looked exhausted, beaten, finished. But her eyes were different, sharp, clear, certain. I used to think strength was holding it together, she thought. Now I know. Strength is falling apart and then getting up anyway. The doorbell rang. Margot's voice called from downstairs. It's time. Carrie touched the velvet box in her purse. The sapphire. The weapon. The truth. Then she walked downstairs to face the war. The drive to the Ashford estate took 30 minutes. Margot drove. Carrie sat in the passenger seat, watching the city give way to suburbs, then to estates, then to the rolling green lawns of old money. The Ashford house appeared around a bend in the road. White columns, circular driveway, perfectly maintained gardens, a monument to wealth and power and the things people do to keep both. Are you ready? Margot asked. No. Carrie opened the car door. But I'm going anyway. Inside, the party was already underway. Crystal chandeliers blazed. A string quartet played in the corner. Waiters circulated with champagne and canapes. 40 guests in formal wear, performing wealth for each other. Eleanor stood by the fireplace, silver hair, perfect, diamonds at her throat, the queen holding court. Mitch stood beside her, handsome, charming, smiling at everyone, the perfect son, the perfect liar. And there, across the room, a flash of red. Bryn, Holloway, had arrived. She wore a dress too tight, too bright, too obvious. Her mother Grace trailed behind her, touching everything, photographing the chandelier, whispering loudly about how beautiful it all was. And on Bryn's hand, catching every light in the room, the sapphire ring. She held it up constantly, adjusting her hair, touching her face, lifting her champagne glass. Every movement calculated to display her trophy. Carrie watched from across the room, felt nothing, no anger, no jealousy, no fear, only patience. The time would come. And when it did, she would be ready. Eleanor noticed her first. The matriarch's eyes narrowed briefly. Then her face smoothed into a welcoming smile. Caroline, dear, how lovely that you could make it. You look... She paused. Radiant. Thank you, Eleanor. You've outdone yourself. The house looks beautiful. Doesn't it? I do so love an anniversary party. Eleanor's hand found Carrie's arm. Her grip was firm, controlling. Come, let me introduce you to some friends. For the next hour, Carrie performed her role. The pregnant wife, the Ashford daughter-in-law, smiling, nodding, saying the right things, all while watching, waiting, counting the minutes until to dinner. Bryn found excuses to come close, to brush past, to make her presence felt. Each time, the ring flashed. Each time, her smile widened. She thinks she's won, Carrie thought. She thinks this is victory. At 8 o'clock, the butler announced dinner. 40 guests moved toward the dining room. Carrie found her seat, across from Bryn. Exactly where she needed to be. The meal began. Courses arrived and departed. Conversations hummed. And all the while, Bryn's ring caught the candlelight. She couldn't resist. The audience was too good. Mrs. Ashford, Bryn said suddenly, Her voice carried across the table, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I've been meaning to thank you." Eleanor's smile flickered. "For what, dear?" "For this ring." Bryn held up her hand. The sapphire sparkled. "It means everything to me. Family history is so important, don't you think?" A murmur ran around the table. Guests exchanged glances. The tension thickened. Eleanor's composure held. Barely. Indeed, the Ashford sapphire has quite a history. Bryn turned to Carrie, fake sympathy dripping from every word. "I'm sure you understand, Caroline. Some things are just meant to be." 20 pairs of eyes turned to Carrie, waiting, watching, expecting her to crumble. She didn't. Instead, she reached into her evening bag, pulled out a velvet box, and opened it. Inside, catching every light in the room, another sapphire gleamed. The silence was absolute. "This is the Ashford sapphire," Carrie said. Her voice was calm, clear, carrying across the silent room with the authority of truth. She held the ring up. "Let the light catch it. Let everyone see." "Mrs. Pemberton?" She turned to the gemologist, seated 2 chairs away. Margot's guest. The trap sprung at last. "Would you care to authenticate this?" Dorothy Pemberton rose from her seat. Every eye in the room followed her. She took the ring from Carrie's hand, examined it under the light. The silence stretched. Plates untouched, champagne going flat, 40 people holding their breath. "This ring," Mrs. Pemberton announced, "is the genuine Ashford sapphire. Burmese. Unheated. Late Victorian setting. I appraised this piece 20 years ago for Warren Ashford. There is no doubt." She set it down gently, then turned to Bryn. "May I see yours, Miss Holloway?" Bryn's face had gone pale. Her hand pulled back instinctively. Protective. Guilty. "I don't think that's necessary," Eleanor said quickly. "This is hardly the time or place for—" "Please, Mother." Margot's voice cut through. "Let Mrs. Pemberton do her job." The room watched, waited. Even Mitch had gone still, his mask finally cracking. Bryn looked at Eleanor, desperate, pleading, but Eleanor had no help to offer. The script had changed. The play had gone off the rails. "Fine," Bryn said. Her voice shook. "It's real. I know it's real. Eleanor gave it to me herself." She thrust her hand forward. Mrs. Pemberton took it gently, examined the ring, held it up to the light. The silence stretched on, endless, unbearable. "This ring," Mrs. Pemberton said finally, "is synthetic. Well made, the color is excellent, but the inclusions are wrong. No silk, no natural fingerprint." She set Bryn's hand down. "This stone is worth perhaps $2,000, perhaps less." The words landed like bombs. Ripples of shock spread through the room. Whispers started, grew louder. "That's impossible," Bryn said. Her voice cracked. "Eleanor gave me this ring. She promised." She stopped. Realized what she'd said, in front of everyone. Eleanor's face cycled through emotions. Surprise, denial, fury, control slipping away like sand through fingers. "This is absurd," Eleanor said. "Caroline has clearly orchestrated some sort of elaborate—" "Mother," Warren's voice cut through. He stood at the head of the table, a glass of wine in his hand, his face unreadable. "Perhaps you should let Caroline finish." The room went silent again. Warren never spoke at parties. Warren never challenged Eleanor. Warren was background furniture. Not tonight. Carrie stood, her legs steady, her voice clear. "I didn't want to do this publicly, but you left me no choice." She looked at Eleanor, then at Mitch, then at Bryn. "For the past 18 months, my husband has been having an affair. He's stolen over $200,000 from our joint accounts. He's taken out loans against our home using forged documents. He's bought a house for his mistress using money from my grandmother's trust." Gasps around the table. Someone knocked over a wine glass. The red spread across the white tablecloth like blood. And all of it, Carrie continued, has been done with Eleanor's knowledge and support. The fake ring in the safe, the job she created for Bryn, the dinner party invitation listing her as future daughter-in-law. That's not, Eleanor started. I have documentation. Carrie nodded to Russell, who had slipped in through the service entrance. He began distributing folders to every guest. Financial records, email exchanges, the divorce strategy Mitch discussed with an attorney 3 months ago. She looked at her husband, the man she'd loved, the man she'd married, the man who'd betrayed her in every way possible. The plan was to wait until I was postpartum, claim I was mentally unstable, take my daughter, and replace me with her. She pointed at Bryn, the girl in the red dress, the trophy who'd thought she'd won. I'm not going to let that happen. Mitch finally moved, his face gray, his charm evaporated. Carrie, please, you don't understand. I understand everything. She watched his face transform, the mask falling away, the calculation emerging. She'd never seen it before, or maybe she'd always seen it and chosen not to look. I understand that you never loved me, she said. I understand that I was convenient, useful, a means to an end, but I'm not that person anymore. The room erupted, voices overlapping, accusations flying, Bryn screaming at Eleanor, Grace wailing about lawsuits, guests standing, leaving, photographing documents with their phones. In the chaos, Carrie walked to the garden doors, stepped outside, let the cool night air fill her lungs. The stars were bright tonight, the garden quiet. Inside, she could hear her old life falling apart. But out here, there was only peace. The baby kicked, strong, ready. She'd done it. She'd survived. She was walking out with her head held high, footsteps behind her. She turned. Eleanor stood in the doorway, her face ruined, mascara streaking. The perfect matriarch finally cracked. You think you've won? Her voice was venom. You've destroyed this family. Carrie smiled, the first real smile in weeks. No, you did that. I'm just letting everyone see. The garden terrace was quiet. Inside, the dinner party had become something else entirely, a reckoning. Eleanor advanced toward Carrie. Her heels clicked against the flagstones. Her face twisted with fury. My son loves me, she hissed. He'll choose me. He always has. Then you can have him. Carrie didn't step back, didn't flinch. I'm taking my daughter. Your daughter? Eleanor laughed. It was an ugly sound. You think you can raise a child alone? Without the Ashford money? Without the Ashford name? I don't need your money. I don't need your name. And I certainly don't need you. Movement behind Eleanor. Mitch appeared in the doorway. His face was gray, empty. The golden sun, finally seeing his future collapse. Carrie. His voice cracked. Please, we can work this out. Think about the baby. She looked at the man she'd married, the man she'd loved, the man she'd built 8 years of her life around, and she felt nothing, less than nothing. I am thinking about the baby, she said. That's why I'm leaving. She'd expected to feel victorious. She didn't. She felt sad. Sad for the life she'd thought she had. Sad for the man she'd thought he was. Sad for the years she'd never get back. But underneath the sadness, something else, something quiet, something strong, relief. Warren appeared behind his son. His presence filled the doorway. For the first time Carrie could remember, Eleanor went silent. Mitchell? Warren's voice was iron. You're going to sign what Josephine prepared. Tonight. Father. You're going to sign, or I'm releasing everything Russell found to the Bar Association and the police. Mitch deflated. literally seemed to shrink. The golden son, the chosen one, brought down by his own father. "I never meant to hurt anyone," he said. The words were hollow, empty. "You never thought about anyone except yourself," Warren replied. "That's worse." Inside, the party had dissolved into chaos. Guests were leaving quickly, not looking back, gathering their coats and their dignity and fleeing before the scandal could touch them. Society's judgment had already been rendered. By morning, everyone who mattered would know what the Ashfords really were. Carrie glimpsed Bryn through the windows. The girl in the red dress sat alone in a corner, sobbing, the synthetic ring on the floor where she'd thrown it. Grace hovered nearby, trying to comfort her daughter, talking about lawsuits, about slander, about fighting back. No one was listening. No one ever would, again. "Come inside," Warren said to Carrie. "There are papers to sign." They gathered in Warren's study, Mitch on one side, Carrie on the other, Josie presiding like a judge at an execution. The documents were spread across the desk. Divorce agreement, custody arrangement, asset division, everything Josie had prepared. Mitch's hands shook as he read. His face went whiter with each page. "I can't sign this," he said. "You're taking everything." "I'm taking what's mine," Carrie corrected. "And what you stole, and what our daughter deserves." "The house in Bryn's name will be sold," Josie added. "The proceeds will go into a trust for your daughter. The condo will be liquidated. Your personal assets are protected by the prenup, but everything that was joint belongs to Carrie. And if I don't sign," Warren spoke from the corner, "then I file the police report tomorrow morning. Forgery, fraud, embezzlement. You'll lose your license, your career, whatever reputation you have left." Mitch looked at his father. Something passed between them, something broken, something that would never heal. "You'd do that to your own son?" "I'm doing it for my granddaughter," Warren said. "Something I should have done for her aunt 30 years ago." The pen scratched across paper, page after page, Mitch signing away his marriage, his deception, his future with Bryn. When it was done, Josie gathered the documents, checked each signature, nodded. "It's finished," she said. Carrie stood. Her back ached. Her ankles were swollen. She was exhausted down to her bones. But she was free. She looked at Mitch one last time. The man she'd married. The man she'd believed. The man who had never deserved her. "I never meant to hurt you," he said. The words he kept repeating. Like if he said them enough, they might become true. "You never thought about me at all," she replied. "That's worse." Then she turned and walked out of the study, out of the house, out of the life she'd built on lies. The night air was cold. The stars were bright. Her daughter kicked against her ribs. Margot was waiting by the car. She'd been crying, but she was smiling too. "Let me take you home," she said. Home. Carrie thought about that word. The house she'd shared with Mitch. The nursery she'd painted with her own hands. The life she'd built that was no longer hers. "I don't think I have a home anymore," she said. Margot took her hand, squeezed it tight. "Then we'll find you a new one." 2 days later, Carrie went into labor. It happened at 3 in the morning, a cramp that woke her from fitful sleep, then another, stronger. She called Josie. Josie called Margot. By sunrise, they were at the hospital. 15 hours of labor. Hard, fast, painful, but Carrie barely noticed. She was somewhere else, somewhere past pain, past fear, past everything that had happened. She was becoming someone new, and when they placed her daughter in her arms, the world went quiet. Just her. Just this perfect, furious, screaming child. Just the beginning of everything. The baby had dark hair, blue eyes, tiny fingers that gripped Carrie's hand like she'd never let go. "Hello," Carrie whispered. "I've been waiting for you." The baby's cries softened. Her eyes found Carrie's face, and something passed between them. something wordless, something eternal, a promise, a bond, a future. Carrie had lost her husband, lost her in-laws, lost the life she'd planned. But holding her daughter, she understood something she hadn't before. She hadn't lost anything that mattered. She'd gained everything. 6 months later, morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows. Carrie sat at her design desk, coffee cooling beside her, baby monitor crackling softly, her daughter sleeping in the next room. The brownstone was new, a rental in a neighborhood she'd never considered before, smaller than the house she'd shared with Mitch. Older, less polished, but it was hers. Every room, every decision, every moment. Her design firm had survived the scandal. More than survived, it had thrived. Turns out, everyone wanted to hire the woman who'd exposed the Ashfords at their own dinner party, the woman who'd walked out with her head high, the woman who'd chosen herself. Her phone buzzed. A text from Josie. A news article. Former real estate developer Mitchell Ashford faces embezzlement charges. Carrie read the headline, skimmed the article. Mitchell's photo stared back at her. He looked older, thinner, the charm worn away. She felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, just a distant acknowledgement that consequences had finally arrived. She set the phone down, returned to her sketches. A boutique hotel in the Arts District. Her biggest commission yet. The baby monitor crackled. A soft cry. Then silence. Then another cry, louder. Carrie smiled, rose from her desk, walked to the nursery. Her daughter lay in the crib, 6 months old, dark hair, blue eyes, the same fierce spirit she'd shown in the womb. "Good morning, little one," Carrie said. She lifted her daughter, held her close, breathed in the smell of baby powder and possibility. They'd survived. Both of them. They'd made it through. A knock at the door interrupted the moment. Carrie carried her daughter downstairs, checked the window, and froze. Bryn Holloway stood on the doorstep. She looked different, smaller somehow, stripped of the red dress, the confidence, the performance. Carrie considered not opening the door. The last time she'd seen Bryn, the woman had been screaming accusations in Eleanor's dining room, but something in Bryn's posture, something in the way she stood, uncertain, exposed. Carrie opened the door. "I came to apologize," Bryn said immediately. Her voice was quiet, raw. "You don't have to accept it. I just needed to say it." Carrie studied her. This woman who'd slept with her husband, worn her ring, planned to take her place, she expected to feel anger, hatred, the urge to slam the door. Instead, she felt something unexpected, recognition. "Come in," she said. They sat in the kitchen, coffee between them. The baby and her bouncer, watching with curious eyes. Bryn spoke first. "I didn't know, in the beginning, about you. He told me his marriage was over, that you were separated, that the baby was a mistake you'd both decided to keep. And you believed him. I wanted to believe him." Bryn's eyes dropped. "He made me feel special, important, like I deserved better than my life." Carrie thought about that, about all the lies Mitch had told, all the stories he'd spun, all the women he'd manipulated. "Eleanor told me the same thing," she said quietly, "years ago, when she was convincing me to marry her son." Bryn looked up, surprised. "She told me I was perfect for the family, that Mitch needed someone like me, that I'd have everything I ever wanted." Carrie smiled. It was sad, knowing. I believed her too. They sat with that. Two women who should have been enemies, connected by the same lies. "What happened to you?" Carrie asked. "After the dinner party?" Bryn laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. "Eleanor dropped me. Immediately. Mitch stopped returning my calls. My job disappeared overnight. The house he bought me went on the market before the papers were even signed. And your mother? Still trying to sue someone, anyone. She doesn't understand that there's no one left to blame. Bryn's hands wrapped around her coffee cup. Her nails were shorter now, unpainted, the synthetic sapphire long gone. He did to me what he did to you, she said. I just didn't see it until later, until I was standing in that dining room, watching everything fall apart, and I realized. She stopped, started again. I realized I was never special. I was just convenient. Carrie recognized the words. She'd thought them herself, countless times in those dark weeks after the discovery. What are you going to do now? She asked. I don't know. Start over, I guess. Figure out who I am, without him, without Eleanor. Bryn looked at the baby. Something softened in her face. She's beautiful. Your daughter. Thank you. Does she have a name? Grace. Carrie touched her daughter's hand. Tiny fingers wrapped around hers. After my grandmother, the one whose money Mitch stole. Grace. Bryn tested the word. That's a good name. Strong. They talked for another hour. About nothing important. About everything important. Two women finding their way through the wreckage of the same storm. When Bryn left, she paused at the door. I'm sorry, she said again, for all of it. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I wanted you to know. Carrie nodded. It doesn't fix anything, but it helps. She watched Bryn walk down the street, disappearing into the city, into whatever came next. Then she closed the door, picked up her daughter, held her close. The phone buzzed again. Margot this time. Sunday brunch tomorrow? Warren wants to see the baby. Carrie smiled. Warren came every weekend now, bringing books, reading to his granddaughter, making up for lost time, trying to be the grandfather he'd failed to be as a father. He and Eleanor had separated, quietly, efficiently. 50 years of marriage dissolved in a single conversation. The last conversation. Eleanor was in Palm Beach now, with a younger man, reinventing herself the way she always did, starting fresh, finding new people to control. Carrie didn't wish her ill. She didn't wish her anything. Eleanor had simply faded. A memory. A lesson learned. Mitch was serving community service, living in a studio apartment, the golden sun finally tarnished. He'd requested visitation once. Carrie had agreed to supervised meetings, once a month, in a public place. He'd shown up late, left early, spent most of the time on his phone. He hadn't asked again. Grace kicked in Carrie's arms, demanding attention, ready for breakfast, ready for the day. Okay, Carrie laughed. I hear you. She carried her daughter to the kitchen, started the morning routine, bottles and diapers, and the thousand small tasks of motherhood. Outside, the city was waking up. Cars passing, people walking, normal life happening all around. And inside, Carrie was building something new, something hers, something real. It wasn't the life she'd planned. It wasn't the life she'd imagined. But it was better. 1 year later. Carrie stood in her new office. Her design firm had expanded, 3 employees. Now, a receptionist, a waiting room with her work on display, on the wall, a photograph, her first major commission, the boutique hotel, floor-to-ceiling windows catching afternoon light, clean lines, warm colors. A space that felt like home. Beneath the photograph, a velvet box, navy blue, gold clasp. The Ashford sapphire inside. Warren had insisted she keep it. It was always meant to be yours, he'd said. It's not an Ashford thing anymore. It's a Grace thing. For your daughter. When she's ready. Carrie touched the box sometimes, remembered what it had meant, what it had cost, what it had revealed. The ring had been a weapon. Now it was a reminder of strength, of truth, of the woman she'd become. Her phone rang. Josie's number. Hey, Carrie answered. What's up? Just checking in. Wanted to make sure you saw the news. What news? Eleanor's engaged to her Palm Beach boyfriend. They're planning a spring wedding. Carrie laughed. She couldn't help it. Good for her. I hope she gets everything she deserves. Oh, she will. Josie's voice was dry. He's got half her money already. My sources say the prenup is a disaster. Some people never learn? No, but you did. They talked for a few more minutes. About work, about Grace, about the future. Then Josie had to go. Another client, another divorce. Carrie hung up, looked around her office, at everything she'd built. A year ago, she'd been pregnant, betrayed, watching her life collapse around her. Now she was here, standing on her own 2 feet, raising a daughter, running a business, living a life that belonged to her. Grace was walking now, wobbly steps around the living room, falling down, getting up, trying again. Just like her mother, Margot had said, never gives up. That afternoon, Carrie picked Grace up from daycare. They walked home through the park, same path Carrie had walked a year ago. After meeting Warren, before the dinner party, she'd been a different person then, scared, angry, desperate. Now she was someone else, someone she'd had to find, someone she'd had to become. They stopped at a bench. Carrie held her daughter on her lap, watched the leaves fall, orange and gold, autumn light through the trees. Grace reached for a falling leaf, chubby fingers, grasping, missing, trying again. You've got this, Carrie whispered. You've had this all along. The leaf drifted past. Grace watched it go, then reached for the next one. That evening, Carrie sat in the nursery, Grace asleep in her arms, the mobile turning slowly overhead. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. The same song from that terrible night. The night before the dinner party. The night she'd cried in this room and wondered how she'd survive. But the song wasn't sad anymore. It was just music, just life continuing. She thought about everything that had happened, the photograph on Mitch's phone, the fake ring in Eleanor's safe, the dinner party where everything changed. She thought about Bryn, about Warren, about Margot, about all the unexpected allies who'd appeared when she needed them most. She thought about the woman she used to be, the woman who trusted too easily, who believed too completely, who built her life on someone else's foundation. That woman was gone now, replaced by someone stronger, someone wiser, someone who knew her own worth. Grace stirred in her arms, made a soft sound, then settled back into sleep. Carrie watched her daughter's face, the tiny features, the perfect fingers, the future she'd fight for, the life she'd give her. Someday I'll tell you the story of the ring, she whispered. It's a good story. It has a happy ending. She thought about what she'd say, how she'd explain, the woman she'd been, the woman she'd become. She'd spent 31 years looking for someone to save her husband, her in-laws, a family that would finally make her whole. And then she saved herself. That was the secret no one told her. The rescue she'd been waiting for had been inside her all along. The mobile played its quiet song. Grace slept in her mother's arms. Outside, the city hummed with life, and Carrie sat in the room she'd painted with her own hands. In the house she'd found on her own, in the life she'd built from the ruins of someone else's lies. She was tired, she was bruised, she was forever changed, but she was also free. And that was enough. That was everything. The sapphire ring waited in its velvet box, a promise for her daughter, a reminder for herself, a story that had started with betrayal and ended with truth. She'd been broken. She'd been shattered. She'd been remade, and she wouldn't have it any other way. If this story touched your heart, if you felt something while listening, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment below and tell me. Have you ever had to find strength you did not know you had? Have you ever walked away from something everyone expected you to accept? Your story matters. Your voice matters. And this community grows stronger when we share our experiences together. If you enjoyed this journey, a simple like helps more than you know. It tells the algorithm that stories like this deserve to be heard. And if you are new here, consider subscribing and turning on notifications. Every week, we bring you powerful stories of resilience, redemption, and the quiet strength of women who refuse to be broken. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Sometimes a story arrives exactly when we need it most. Closing disclaimer. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually crafted by our team to deliver meaningful storytelling and valuable life lessons to our audience. Every word was written with intention. Every scene was designed to resonate with your heart. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening until the end. Until next time, remember, the rescue you are waiting for has been inside you all along.